Okay, Harry, we're 1-0. That's the important thing. But I was listening to Jay Lehman earlier this week on Jeremy's podcast, and he said something that struck me, and it made a lot of sense. He said that last year after the Indiana loss, he felt better about the direction of the team than he did after the Toledo win. And I think his point was the dominance that we displayed on the lines against Indiana. We just happened to shoot ourselves in the foot too many times. Well, we shot ourselves in the foot plenty against Toledo. But I want to start with you, the offensive lineman. What the heck happened up front? And let's start with offensive line that couldn't quite get the push on running the ball, and then they didn't do a great job protecting Altmeyer either.
Yeah, the run blocking was concerning. And when I was watching it through the first time, the first drive, it really seemed like they had their stuff together. They had some cool wrinkles. They had that one play, I think it was to Isaiah, where they're running left and then it's pitched back and he goes back, like you got two guards pulling over to the right and you had a crease right there. But for the most part, it just seemed like, you weren't getting much of a push, which is concerning when you're playing a team. I don't care how highly they are ranked in the MAC. As a matter of fact, I think I looked at the AP poll. They received more votes going into week one than you did, which is wild. So they're a good team, but it doesn't matter. You're a Big Ten team. They're a MAC team. You should be getting pushed when you're running the ball. But I also think some of it has to fall onto, and again, not a running back. I'm a not former offensive lineman, but it just seemed like they weren't hitting the hole with the same ferocity that we had guys hitting the hole last year. Now, obviously, that guy who was doing that is in the NFL now, but for the most part, it did seem like they weren't maybe hitting it as quickly as they should have been. The pass blocking, I thought for the most part, I thought was better than the run blocking, but towards the end of the game, you really kind of started to see it fall apart. Thank God Luke Altmeyer knows how to pull a rabbit out of his hat. We could talk about that. I'm sure we're going to talk about him as this podcast goes on, because my God, the takeaway from that you see a lot of people having is we have a quarterback now. But yeah, that's something you got to work on, because Kansas doesn't have a great defense, but going through the rest of the year, Toledo's not the best defensive line that you're going to have to go up against.
That is true. And we're going to talk plenty about Luke Altmeyer because he really is the positive, the takeaway, with a few others. A question about the offensive line, because I've heard a few people posit this idea that because you did have two new pieces in Kreutz, and then at right guard, you had Geske. You had Chrysler starting at right tackle, and he did get quite a bit of playing time last year, but you still, as a collective group of five, are seeing them together for the first time. How long might it take for that to coalesce, if it does? And I'm assuming, given that, Bart Miller's track record and Bret Bielema's track record, it will come together. But how quickly?
I will say that is something that almost seems, and I'm not saying you're saying this, the idea of like players playing next to each other coming together, it almost seems like one of your favorite terms, like a meatball-y concept, but it's 100% a real thing. I'll remember when I was I think I was a sophomore or a junior, we had Austin Schmidt and Ted Karras were on one side of the ball, and beginning of the year Ted knew what he was doing, but Austin, you could tell he had a little bit of some growing pains going into that first year of the starter, so it must have been as a sophomore. And as the year went on, by the end of the year, they were getting pushed on anyone they were going up against. That must have been 2014, because I remember the offensive line was really starting to pick up as we were getting some of those wins towards the end of the year. But yeah, that it'll take some time. I hope it doesn't take until the end of the year. But as these guys start to play more alongside each other, you can tell how much of a push maybe if you're the tackle, how much of a push the guard gets, how much you need to maybe lend help on double teams or on pass pro, how quick you can leave a defensive lineman to go give another guy help. It's going to take some time. I would say there's no real timetable. I would say if you're waiting for the offensive line to really reach its full potential, it's probably, unfortunately, not going to be until halfway through to the latter half of the year.
I guess the good news with that is that you do have a couple of your tougher opponents in the second half of the year. You have a 3-game stretch with, I believe, that's the Maryland, Wisconsin, and Minnesota stretch. And then you do have Iowa in the last 3 games. And early on, other than Penn State, I'd like to think that you match up well enough in the trenches but I kind of thought that going into last Saturday's game, and that was one of the biggest areas of concern. How much of it, and this might seem like a very vague question, but how much of it is effort? And maybe this will lead us a bit more to defensive line, because it seems like defensive line, they're the ones pushing forward. They are the ones attacking forwardly at something all the time. So how much of a lineman's job is pure effort?
I'm speaking more on offensive line right now, obviously. I haven't played defensive line since high school. And maybe some of my bias is going to come out here because I'm an former offensive lineman. But I think it's a good amount for offense or defense. But you got to know what you're doing. A lot of time, the problem on offensive line comes from maybe, the bullets are firing, everything's going on around you. You need to know, okay, what are my responsibilities if it's a running play or a passing play? And when you're out there and it's game speed, a lot of times you just kind of fall back into whatever your instincts are. And that's a lot of times what the coaches are trying to spend all training camp to coach you out of, is to not do maybe the things that you're comfortable with doing because those aren't the right things to do. So I would say some of it is effort, but a lot of it's just preparation. Where the effort comes in is one of the plays that I saw, and I'm sure you were not happy with this either. There was a play, I think, we were going left to right on your television screen, on your radio dial. And I forget if it was Randolph or Newton, couldn't get back in time. It was, okay, Newton.
It was Newton.
Couldn't get back in time to not be offsides. That's effort. I mean, if you got 10 people who are on the right side of the ball and you're not, you got to run faster. You got to be ready because you're costing your team 5 yards in that situation. So at the end of the day, I'm going to end up saying it's a good amount. Like, some of it is effort. I feel like on the offensive line, a lot of it is, you need to be prepped and ready to go. And maybe, unfortunately, they weren't as prepped as they should have been. I can't speak on the intricacies of the techniques and the play calling of defense. But as an offensive lineman, I'm looking at it just saying, man, all you got to do is run upfield and push the guys in front of you. And you got to be able to do that. You got to be able to give all you got.
So watching that game on Saturday, and I've only seen a few plays through just kind of the GIFs that are circulating on Twitter that show some of the good, of course, and we'll get to Altmeyer again, because I know that is the story, but I kind of did the opening segment about him and want to focus on something we thought would be good and was not good. So if you were to kind of speculate as to the cause for why both lines struggled against Toledo, here's my theory, simplistic as it may be. I thought that Illinois would have enough in the tank to take Toledo as seriously as you should any week one opponent. But I also get the feeling that they were feeling their oats just enough to perhaps not play with the same chip on the shoulder or the same edge that Toledo's linemen were. Simplistic as that sounds, do you think that might have had something to do with the push that Toledo was getting on both sides? Or do we start getting into larger concerns that could stretch well into the season based on schematics, fundamentals? How do you see, if there was a pie chart of all the things that led to poor line play, how does that chart break down?
I think you would imagine that it has to have to do mostly with Toledo being more pumped up and fired up and ready to go than your guys are, which isn't a good thing. But I mean, the thing that is encouraging is we do have such a larger sample size, especially on defense, of these guys going up against better competition than Toledo and getting the job done and being projected future NFL players. So at least on the defensive side, and this is all assuming that this Toledo offense and defensive line aren't going to go on to be like, top 5 in the country, which they're a MAC team. So I'm assuming that's not the case. But no, I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do with you're going into it. You got to shake off the rust. A lot of the training camp in the off season has just been going. I mean, at least when I was there, I'm not sure how it is under Bielema, but you could say you're going full speed. You can say we're trying to simulate what a game type speed is right now, it's never going to be the same as what it is out there. It's just the nature of the beast. So I think that a lot of it boils down to these guys were more amped. They had nothing to lose. They were going out there, and you kind of, because you saw when you went out there and when you needed it, or when it was scripted, you got it. On the first drive of the game, you had more of a push than they did. You were able to walk right down the field. And then at the end of the game, the most impressive instance of us running the football was after the Casey Washington catch, when every single time you were falling forward for 3, 4, 5 yards. And we can get into this. This is a side note of us getting down to like the 10-yard line and then taking a timeout at 8 seconds. I kind of have like an idea of why he did that, but I thought that was interesting. But that last, you could see when you needed it, you were able to get it on offense, and a couple key plays on defense as well.
Let's talk about that real quick, because he did address it. Bret Bielema addressed the timeout with 8 seconds. At this point, Harry, I left the game at halftime because I was too pissed off. And before we get to that timeout, actually, with 8 seconds, question for you, because you texted me after the first score, or maybe it was right. Was it right after the first score?
It was right after the first score.
You and I were thinking the same thing, because my prediction going in was 31-16. And I will say, in my defense, if we had just not extended drives with stupid defensive penalties, that might have happened.
It would have been close. Yeah,
I digress. But you and I were feeling the same way after that opening drive, especially because Altmeyer looked great. We were getting a push on the line, and then our defense was coming on the field. So we're feeling good about this. Do you think that with the ease with which we scored, the same confidence that you and I were exuding via text was happening on that sideline, but maybe not for the better? Maybe it was, oh yeah, we got this. Can that kind of percolate throughout a sideline?
I think that probably would have come more so maybe then, but I definitely think that came when you took the lead in the second half as well, because that's when, at least as a fan, I'm sitting at home thinking, and also this was probably the closest to the definition of a roller coaster game that I've ever seen, where you go up, then you're down by 2 scores. Then when you go up again, I figured, oh, it's over. They're not going to score twice against us, which, by the way, we need to stop letting teams do that. That's the 3rd year in a row where, was it 2 years ago? It was Maryland. Last year it was Indiana, where they needed a touchdown and they got a touchdown. And Toledo did it again this year. So luckily, it wasn't the same result there at the end. But no, I mean, I think the first drive doesn't necessarily fall into that category, because the first drive of a football game is so much different than any other drive, maybe aside from coming out of halftime. But even then, it's not the same, because when you're coming out of halftime, most of it's just adjustments. At the beginning of the game, that's scripted. And people say, what's the script coming into the game? We literally have pages saying, this is going to be our first play. This is going to be our second play. You start practicing on that on Wednesday, so that you know where exactly on the field you're going to be, where, the exact types of plays you're going to run. So that's why the first plays always look smooth. That's why you see games, even in the NFL. The one I always go back to is the Eagles played the Vikings in 2017 in the NFC Championship game. Vikings walk right down the field. It looked so easy. They go up 7-0. Eagles win 38-7. So the first drive of the game is almost an anomaly. And that's why I think you don't necessarily go into that first drive after you score thinking, oh, we got this. That would have been the thought process after you go up 27-19 is, oh, we got this. This game, it's out of reach. We've started to assert our dominance. Now we can just kind of kick it into cruise control.
So 27-19, that means they got a field goal. And yeah, they would have, it was the Akis penalty, which continued that final drive for Toledo. Yeah. Now you mentioned, so we're at the tailgate lot watching the second half. And I agree with you. When Illinois took the lead, I thought game over, and okay, we're going to get the win. And at that point, you're feeling pretty good. Toledo, of course, takes the 1-point lead. But we'll get to the runs in that last drive, because I do think that's something that hopefully can be built upon, because there was great push when it mattered the most. The timeout with 8 seconds, Bielema was talking about that, and I kind of thought the same thing in the lot, and I was glad that he elaborated on it. On a 3rd down, if it would have been 4th down, right, and he calls the timeout with 8 seconds, ridiculous. But then when I saw the 3rd down situation, I thought, okay, they had positioned the ball in the center. They're at the 10-yard line, 8-yard line, whatever. And This is to buy them one possible mess up. And if they do fall on the ball, whatever, get your second shot with 4 seconds to go, and you still got a timeout in your pocket. So he did talk about that after the game. I thought, especially after he explained it, it was good situational football. Of course, there's always the risk of a miracle return. Or, I mean, I even remember after they made the field goal, Harry, I thought, I don't know, just kick the ball out of bounds. Like, it's serious. Let them start at the 40. Who cares? And then they'll try a Hail Mary, and that'll be the end of the game. But that was what he explained, at least.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I was thinking. And here's the thing. These are college kids. So stuff happens. Weird stuff happens. And that's what I was thinking when he took it at 8 seconds, because you don't even have to just fall on the ball. You had a timeout. If it's a bad snap and your holder picks it up and he's bobbling around, by then there's probably 5 seconds. You have a timeout. Tell him to throw it into the ground. Who cares if it's grounding? It's a spot foul. Even if I think the rule is if you were within like 5 yards, it's a 10-yard penalty. That was like a 25, 26-yard field goal. So it's still a makeable field goal if everything goes wrong. Throw the ball into the ground, 10-second runoff. You take your timeout to negate that. Now it's 4th down. Now you have like a 36-yard field goal. So at the end of the day, I totally understand why they did that. They're not NFL guys. Like you said, if it was 4th down, then you're questioning what you're going out there and doing.
And that was a Zook moment against Iowa. So it's funny, the difference between Bielema has bought that benefit of the doubt over the course of 15 years of being a head coach. Ron Zook, towards the end of an Iowa game in 2008, Illinois was about to take the game-winning field goal, and he called a timeout with like 25 seconds. The clock was running. It was going. We could have done the whole bleed it down until you get the last play, and he called with like 20-some seconds to go. All right, let's focus here, because I like all this get into the line stuff, because I'll be honest, we will spend the bulk of this talking about Altmeyer as he deserves it to be. But is there any chance of carryover from what we saw that last drive? Because I think the way that Illinois, the more I think about it, the more impressed I am with how they closed that game out. Of course, there's the miracle throw. Without that, you don't have what comes next.
By the way, I haven't seen anything to make me think otherwise, but I don't know about you. When you saw the catch, were you screaming, get up to the ball, run a play, run a play, run a play? I haven't seen anything to say the ball hit the ground. But it was one of those weird looking plays where when you catch it, he hits the ground. Have you seen anything or anyone saying anything otherwise?
No. And that's interesting, because it was a really hard contested ball. So there was this great shot, and at TCR Brad on Twitter put these out. It was from the Toledo sideline perspective. You look at the first shot, when the ball was in his breadbasket there, it's a contested ball. This could have easily just fallen out. The way Casey somehow snares that, it was not close to being on the ground. But you're right. When we saw it from the angle of the TV, you see his back. What we were doing on the tailgate lot is we have this 5-second delay. So we are getting what happens in the stadium right before we see it. And we're waiting and we're waiting. And then you hear this, you hear the crowd from afar. And then Gene Honda says, 1st and 10 for the Illini. And then you look at the TV, you see it in real time, and you think, I don't think I quite processed it quickly enough to think, go to the line, go to the line. They do get the next play off. Didn't even go to review, right?
Yeah. No, they did not go to review.
Yeah, so that tells you, I mean, it was a clean catch, and there was no doubt about it, that though they could have easily went to look at it. But, okay, those next 6 plays, the way that Illinois got that ball, another 20 yards, basically. They get a big first down, by the way, when it's like a 3rd and 2, and Bret Bielema specifically referenced this. How on a 3rd and 2, they get the first down. If they had not, we're talking about a minute to go. Toledo burns their last time out, and then they got plenty of time to go make a game-winning field goal themselves, but they convert. And it was actually a really well-run ball. I think that was McCray at that point, who bounces off the left tackle maybe, but a good push. Is there any way, if I'm trying to find a silver lining, Harry, in all this, that can propel them into Friday? I mean, I know momentum is only as good as, it might not be good at all, but for as far as line play is concerned, they really did look good in that last bit. The first bit and the last bit, they look good.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and by the way, McCray almost shot himself in the foot when he ran out of bounds there, because that's what led to them being able to have that much time. But I digress. You got the first down; it's all null and void. I think it could, because here's a reference to two moments in that game. At the end of the game, everyone on the planet, everyone in the stadium knew you were going to run it. We knew it, they knew it, everyone knew you were going to run it, and you still were able to do it. You were still able to push the line, still able to get a first down, bleed the clock out, and kick the game-winning field goal, with essentially no time. Compare that to earlier in the game. The most frustrated I was when we were on defense was when they kept getting like 9 yards on first down, because I'm like, man, you get 9 yards on first down, they're just going to throw it deep on 2nd and 1. And even if they don't get it, boom, you run it for 3rd and 1, and then first down. And that happened like 4 times in a row. It was ridiculous. But the most frustrating moment for me in the entire game on offense was the 2nd and 3 to the 3rd and 1 to the 4th and 1 to the turnover on downs, right? Because you get up there, for on 3rd and 1, everyone knows you're going to run it, right? Everyone knows you're going to run it. You fly right up the middle, right? And it doesn't work. You fly a second time right up the middle, and it doesn't work. Twice, 2 times you fly right up the middle, and it doesn't work. Everyone on the planet knows that you're going to do it, and you can't get it to work. Similar to the end of the game, and the fact that they grew from there to the end of the game, and that's why I think there could be carryover to the next game with the running game.
So in a way, that was rock bottom. Like that was the low point. And, you mentioned that exact sequence. Keep in mind, Illinois was on their side of the field, Toledo side of the field, 30 yards to go to the end zone. At that point, it was early enough in the game where the offense looked like they were kind of going to cruise in this game. They only had 4 possessions in the first half. And I know that partly has to do with the new clock rules, but it's a shame that it ended like that. But if anything, and this kind of leads to a more macro question, the benefits of learning after a win. I've heard that a lot the last few days, and I'd like to think there's some truth in that. My only fear is that because they got the win, those lessons might not be quite as ingrained in them because there wasn't a consequence, right? It was, you got away with one. So my fear is that they didn't learn anything at all. But you mentioned maybe some carryover even in the second half. The offensive line did do better in the second half. And I know that there was still some pressure on Altmeyer, and they got some runs going, but it was a little bit inconsistent till the very end. Do you think, and you might have to look back to your own experience, learning after a loss, learning after a win, what's the difference? Is there a benefit to one over the other?
I didn't have a lot of wins to learn after. But I will say, I think the game that kind of comes to mind, and this is weird because I can't necessarily speak 100% on it, but I think the comp would be the Penn State game 2 years ago, because you go into Happy Valley and you beat the number 9 team in the country. Were they number 9, or I just think that number? Okay,
they were top 10, and that 9 sounds right.
Yeah. So you go in there, you win that game in 9 overtimes, and the thought process is, we just beat the number 9 team in the country. There's no way we could have done that unless we played an A+++ game. If I remember correctly, that game was pretty sloppy. I mean, we had some holding calls. We had some moments when we could have gone up by a touchdown and we didn't. And, you had some moments in overtime. You dropped a 2-point conversion that would have won the game, I think, in the 3rd or 4th overtime. So you don't necessarily come out of that thinking we have a ton to learn from, even if the coaching staff is telling you all the things that you didn't do right in that game. Your thought process is, how could it not be? Yeah, that's all well and good. We just beat the Penn State Nittany Lions, number 9 team in the country, in Happy Valley. Next week you lose to Rutgers at home. So I mean, compare that to this game. Everyone knows in that locker room, this is the mindset in the locker room. We should have just beat that team by 40. That's a MAC team. I don't care how good they are. We should have just beat that team into the ground. It should not have come down to a game-winning field goal. This feels like a loss. Thank God we won, but this feels like, this does not feel Wisconsin last year. This does not feel any of those big wins in that run last year to 7-1. This feels like, we have a lot to work on going forward. So I would imagine, because of the level of competition you were playing, not Toledo themselves, but a MAC team, I think that lends you to, being able to learn from a win more so than against a better team. If that makes any sense.
Yeah,
That
that
makes
makes
sense.
sense.
Yeah.
The one thing we all learned, thanks to this is me trying to transition here. The biggest thing we all learned, Illinois got a quarterback. Harry,
Yeah.
imagine you're in the locker room. Okay, well, after the game, of course, but then you get to practice. I assume Sunday's all film, short week, so they definitely practice on Monday. And is there a different energy you think amongst the whole Smith Performance Center with in those locker rooms of, whoa, we got a guy, we got a dude, and something that really stood out to me with Jay Lehman talking about it when he was running Altmeyer, it wasn't just little skitter scatter off to the side and out of bounds. He was going right up the middle into the mouth of the beast and took a few hits. And then the biggest throw of the game, if you've ever seen Not Another Teen Movie, it's that scene where the quarterback throws to the special kid who catches it and then he gets decapitated. And that honestly could have happened to Luke Altmeyer the way he got hit on that throw. And now he's fine.
That play looked so weird too, because I know this can't possibly be the case, but it almost looked like a play in Madden.
It was.
Where like you get hit from the bottom and top. And for some reason, this might just be me, but it looked like he was like looking at the sideline. Like he wasn't even looking at Casey Washington. And it's just one of those ones where you're looking to the side and your body's like throwing it to the X button has to be down there. I pressed X, so the ball's going to go that way. That play, I've watched it so many times. Yeah, it was an amazing play. I would say this is, it's weird to say, and it might be bad to say because, I loved all the guys I played with. But the quarterbacks that we had there never were really seen as guys who were game changers. I mean, maybe you can speak more on Nate because I wasn't there. I was there for his last year.
I think when I look back to that era, so the tail end of the Shieldhouse era, you knew he was a good quarterback, but not the kind that was going to be good enough to lift the team. Wes Lunt had a lot of excitement because he was a highly regarded recruit, but he just physically, as big as he just wasn't a physical specimen. I mean, he was limited because he was so.
He was not a mobile quarterback. I remember anytime he would run, that's an understatement.
It is.
I remember he ran though. It was you'd see Illinois Loyalty or someone put out a little GIF, even if it was like a 3 or 4 yard run.
Other ones, Harry, like I'm trying to think, Riley O'Toole was fun. And he did towards the end of that year. I think that's the closest thing in that 3-game stretch where he had a thing going.
That was the closest thing I would say was at the end of that year when he came in there and he helped us beat Penn State and Minnesota and Northwestern. That was when you could tell the quarterback's got some swagger. He's kind of the reason. I mean, also we had a really good defense, if I recall, in 2014 towards the end of the season with Jihad and Dewan. But that's the closest I can think of at least when I was there, when we had a quarterback that instilled that kind of excitement for the offensive side of the ball.
So do you think that this week it adds any sort of energy or buzz when I'm sure they felt good going into game one, but everybody knows that it's practice, as you mentioned earlier. It's just different when you play your first game, and that this was Luke's first, big start. He did play in the Sugar Bowl when he came in relief in the second quarter. He got to start against an FCS team. This is different, though. I mean, this is now his gig, and it's like, don't mess up, kid. And not only did he not mess up, he, minus the one big mistake, was fantastic. He was the, I believe, 4th highest graded quarterback in the Big Ten last weekend, according to PFF. I'd have to double check that, but you know what? It sounds right because short of being McCarthy or Tua's little brother or Drew Aller, there was no other quarterback that looked as good as Luke Altmeyer.
It's going to be fun to play Drew Aller in 2 weeks, by the way. My goodness. No, I mean, I think I would say there's probably a buzz because of how he looked out there. Like you said, he had the one pass, the interception, which was an ugly one. But aside from that, I mean, he looked rock solid. I mean, there was one play where we were going, again, right to left on your radio dial. We were around the 10 or 15 yard line, and the pocket was collapsing in on him. And I have watched enough Illinois football games, whether it's from the sideline or from my couch, to see that ends in whoever it is. Even if it's Wes, if it's Riley, if it's Brandon Peters, if it's Tommy DeVito, they get sacked. They get 1 yard, they get sacked. He was able to duck under some guys and get down to like the 4-3 yard line. And I remember watching that replay. I was like, I've never seen an Illinois quarterback do that before. That is a game changer right there. So if you have that kind of guy, I mean, he looked as good as you could look aside from that one play this past week. And now I think I think buzz is the right word, because I don't think it's a foregone conclusion outside of Champaign that, oh, this guy's special, this guy's someone to watch. I think that's going to probably come this upcoming week, or maybe, when we start to get into conference play, when he goes up against better competition, and if he can still do it then and still be putting up, still be throwing the ball the way he is, still be running the ball the way he is, that's when I think people will start to, notice, okay, we got a special guy here at quarterback. And, the best part about that is, when you got a guy at quarterback, you put butts in the seats. I mean, when you can speak on it, 2007, 2001, whether it's Kirk Kittner or Juice, I mean, you were having, now I would think 2008 because of the recognition of what had happened in 2007. But yeah, I mean, that's when you're able to really get a lot more attention to the team, not just buzz from within the Smith Center, but, from fans and from the campus.
I mentioned that on Sunday's podcast, Harry, that's what puts butts in the seats. And I did specifically reference Kurt Kittner because that team was loaded with great wide receivers, Brandon Lloyd and Walter Young, and they had Rocky Harvey was a fun running back, and they had great cornerbacks like Eugene Wilson, who was an early second-round pick to the Patriots, and they were loaded. They won the Big Ten. They went 10-1 in the regular season. But what brought people out was they knew they had a special quarterback. And when you've got that, it doesn't matter who the other team is on the other sideline. You feel like you've got a fighting chance. And you mentioned Drew Aller, and I know that Penn State looked great. But yet, regardless of what happens against Kansas on Friday, I'm not necessarily going to wake up the morning at Penn State thinking, we got this. But I'm going to say, what the hell? And you know what makes that different? And why, no matter what happens Friday, I might say, what the hell? Let's see what happens. Is because you have a quarterback. You have a playmaking quarterback. And that is a huge difference. And I want to kind of transition this into Friday because you mentioned better competition. The good news for this offense, which I thought on the whole, Barry Lunny called a very good game. I think the run game will incrementally get better, but I think you have a great starting place with Altmeyer and your top 3 wide receivers. Those guys were,
by the way, we kind of skated over that. They looked, I mean, Pat Bryant, I mean, we'd seen some flashes last year. You know what he got in Isaiah, but I mean, Pat Bryant, that guy looks like, and each guy kind of has their thing, right? If you were to say, like, who is your most talented wide receiver, it's Isaiah Williams. If you were to say who's your clutchest wide receiver, I think it's without a doubt Casey Washington. And then Pat Bryant is the one who scored the most touchdowns. So, I mean, the fact that now, if you get the running game going, when was the last time, I keep saying you could speak on this, but when was the last time we had an offense that was this explosive? I mean, that could be, if you have this kind of passing game, if you get the running game up to par, would it be back in 2001? When you had a guy who was just throwing it, the ball was flying all over the place, that kind of explosive offense?
I think so, Harry. And when I was trying to find context for, and I know it's one game, right? But he is an old redshirt sophomore. When Kittner got going, he was a true sophomore, from what I recall. So he was a young guy that was just getting his first reps. He played a few games his freshman year, but he came on a sophomore year. Luke Altmeyer is a redshirt sophomore who looks really good in his first game, but there were a lot of Kittner-esque qualities about him in just I think the intangible kind of way that he carried himself in the pocket, the way that he kind of carried himself on the sidelines. My dad was making note of just the way that he was interacting with the other wide receivers and the offensive line, and just a lot of camaraderie, which I know sounds kind of like wishy-washy, intangible stuff, but I do think it matters for the quarterback. But you mentioned 2001. I think the big comp to that would be if they get a running game that can be somewhat consistent. Back then it was Rocky Harvey and Antonio Harris, thunder and lightning kind of thing. I think you could best case scenario, get a little bit of that going with Reggie Love and Josh McCray. But it's the fact that you have an efficient offense, passing offense, with big play capability. And what I'm excited about for Friday is Kansas's defense, I don't think is necessarily a step up in competition from what you saw against Toledo's defense.
They're not. They're pretty comparable from again, I think they have as many AP votes at the beginning of the year as Toledo did. So you're all right there with one another. Plus, I mean, I'm sorry to step on, if you were going in this direction, but I mean, Jalen Daniels is getting his first start right now, right? First start of the year, because he did not play against Missouri State. That's the other thing. Kansas played Missouri State. So as much as you do want that 1-0, we're both 1-0. So at the end of the day, even playing field going into this game, we have much, much better reps for our guys coming into this as opposed to what Kansas has.
Was going to ask you about that because I do think I used the analogy last week. I think of you're in the bat on deck circle, you're a batter, you got the donut on the bat and you're swinging a heavier bat so that when you take that donut off, it's just a little bit easier. And I wonder, because of that experience that you had against the Toledo, more of a comparable opponent than a Missouri State that was, I believe, a 3-win team in the whatever FCS conference they were in last year.
The Big Sky.
Yeah, that sounds right. They're in the same one. The same one as South Dakota State. Or North Dakota State, sorry. Anywho.
Yeah, okay.
But so going into this game, I'm excited to see the passing offense. I want to throw this possible cliche out there and see if you can either confirm it or refute it, which is, can you establish the pass first, which leads to the run game being more open because you are now stretching the defense and you got the defensive backs on their heels. Can that work?
I think it can. I think the old cliche is you run the ball to set up the pass. But, I mean, early on in that game, we were having, aside from one big run from Reggie Love when we were deep in our own territory, you were having no success aside from maybe some design runs for Luke or from when he was scrambling. So early on in the game, the only time you were moving the ball was when you were passing it. So I think you could definitely – I think there's no problem doing it in reverse because we just saw it. I mean, even towards the end of the game, when you needed to get into field goal range, you were able to pass it with ease. And then the closer you got, that kind of lent itself to you being able to open up the running game a little bit more. And then it just comes back to what I said before, that when you got down there, it was that much more impressive that you were able to run it when everyone knew that was what you were going to do. I think going up against this Kansas defense, I mean, even going back to last year, towards the end of the year, after their impressive start, they were giving up like 50 points a game to, I mean, albeit some Big 12 schools who are renowned for their offense, but still 50 points a game. Whether it was to Texas, I think they gave up 50 points to Arkansas in the bowl game that they played. And even though that took overtime, I think they still gave up 30 or 40 going into overtime. So I think that it was very reassuring to see that the passing game was as impressive as it is, because I do believe Bielema is going to get the running game going. I think that, I mean, how could it not be better than what it was from last game? I think you're going to carry over from what you saw at the end. And I think that with a weak defense that you're going up against, I think that this game goes one of two ways. I think, and I feel good about this game, by the way. I do. I don't know if this is maybe me, feeling my oats a little bit too much, which, by the way, I love that saying, feeling my oats, because I have oats like every day. And they are delicious. I feel my oats every day.
Boo. Boo.
That wasn't even a classic Harry bad pun. I just like oats.
I was saying boo earns, don't worry.
Oh, someone was saying boo earns. God, where was I?
Well, no, wait, let's talk about the feeling of this Kansas game.
Yeah.
Because to me, there are the obvious things against you, which are Jalen Daniels is a dynamic player. There's no really doubt. And their offense returns everybody. And this is the game they've circled Friday night at home. They got the black jerseys, special jerseys for it. This is their marquee game until maybe they play. They played Texas at home last year and got smoked. So I don't know what their marquee home game is, but this is it until there's a bigger one. And they feel just like we do that they've arrived at a different plateau, like they've taken a step. But then, Harry, the reason once Illinois won, that's the key. If they would have lost, you bet I would have been like, what the hell do I do? I would have been completely frazzled. College football is weird. Trying to transpose one performance to the next and saying, well, the line play did this against Toledo, therefore they're going to get shredded against Kansas. I think it's just too easy. Now there is a chance that there's something more fundamentally wrong with this team that they're going to have to figure out. Maybe, right? And as an Illini football fan, I've seen that before, even with high expectations. But the other part of me just says, wait a second. You escaped. You got a comparable opponent in many ways to Toledo. It just happens to be on the road. Bret Bielema teams happen to play better on the road, it seems, as a trend line.
Your biggest wins so far, aside from Iowa, have been on the road over the last 2 years with Bielema.
Yeah, and I mean, Minnesota at home too, but really the Wisconsin win was the most impressive of all those. You dominated on the road at Camp Randall. But here's the other thing too. Underdog. This team last year, after the Indiana game, I don't think they were favored in another game other than Chattanooga. They were not favored at Wisconsin. They were not favored against Iowa, I don't think. They were not favored against Minnesota at home. Well, I think they were 6.5-point dogs.
Yeah, because I think Minnesota was ranked at that point.
Yep. So here they are. Familiar territory. They're the underdogs. They get to pretend at least that they have the chip on their shoulder for this. So I think there's just as many things going forward as against it. And I can't shake this feeling that, wait a second, there are some scary parts of this game, but the other part of me says, they'll fix what they need to. And that the good things you saw last Saturday, they travel.
Yeah. Well, you would hope that that the strengths that you worked on or that you showed in week one are going to travel. And then it's weird to say that this is reassuring, but the most disappointing part of the entire game last week was the play from the two guys who were supposed to be your stalwarts in the defensive line. You know, your two pillars of strength right there on the defensive line just absolutely crumbled there early on. So if they're able to, rebuild back to what they were last year, then you would imagine that there's no way going into Kansas that this is going to be the same defensive performance. I mean, there's just no way they're going to be able to get back to where they were last year.
I would agree with that. Here's the thing. You mentioned track record. They've got it. They have it, and I will say Keith Randolph did play a good second half. He did. But the Johnny Newton thing, I don't know what the hell that was. And I would have to think there were some serious conversations. If there's anything to motivate somebody, it's the fact you got millions of dollars at stake. So that has to be the aberration. And I would imagine he will play with much more vigor because he did last year. So let's say all things being equal, Harry, let's say that the offense, because this is the only pod I'm going to do before Friday, because me and Isaac are going to do one of those live ones because, Friday night and away game, and it'll be fun, but won't have another time to make predictions kind of. So let's each brainstorm one thing Illinois will win if. One thing each, okay? And one thing Illinois will lose if. I'll just start with Illinois will win if they keep Kansas under 30 points. I think that the offense can get 30 plus. And I don't want to say without too much problem. That's still a lot of points, but I think there's enough weapons there. And Kansas's defense should not scare you. They are probably not better than Toledo's. And I think that the offense, if they just play clean and don't derail things like they did that drive we talked about, the 4th and 1, or the second drive of the game where they got themselves in a 2nd and 25 or something.
The penalties, man. Yeah. I'm not going to pick the penalties as my will win if. Also, by the way, I didn't realize this. After you failed on that 4th and 1, which you were up 7-6 when you failed on that, when you got the ball back next, you were down by 12 points. How crazy, what kind of swing is that? Is absolutely insane. But yeah, I would say I feel encouraged going into this game. And the reason I feel encouraged going into this game is because I think that our offense showed us enough where if they can be close to what Kansas is, because Kansas has a good offense. They're bringing back Daniels. I think the rust that he has is probably going to get shooken off within, the first quarter or whatever it is, because it's a home game, the atmosphere. If your offense can compete with their offense, I think your defense is going to get back to not what they were last year. You were the number one defense in the country last year, but you have too many strengths over there. Even playing a, whatever you want to rank them, C game, they were able to make plays like the Scott pick six, So I think Illinois wins if their offense comes to, I'm not going to say matches Kansas's offense, but if Illinois' offense is comparable to Kansas's offense, you'll win this game. I feel confident saying that too.
And a quick aside on the defense, like you mentioned, I mean, Miles Scott, we haven't mentioned him yet. I did in the opening segment, I'm pretty sure, but spectacular debut, worth all the praise they gave him. Xavier Scott was pretty good too. So the two Scotts, on the whole, the defensive backs, I think, are going to be fine. They will be, of course, tested more against the Kansas wide receivers, but I'm not worried about them as some sort of defensive sieve where other teams can just go right through them. I don't think that's it. So it really just comes down to, okay, front seven, the old guys, figure it out. But I agree with you. So I said, if Illinois holds Kansas under 30, they win. You said if the offense can just be comparable, let's say even 80% of what Kansas is.
Yeah. I also think it's flying under the radar that you're playing against a team with a quarterback who can move similar to the way Finn did. It was a nice little warm up. You didn't do very well containing Finn, but it was nice. Now you have some tape on maybe how they're going to work on containing Daniels.
Illinois will lose if I were to think of the biggest bugaboo, and I'm going to steal your thunder there. If you have 8 or more penalties,
yeah,
we had 10. I will give them credit. There was 1 in the second half. So
it was a big one.
It was a big one. Yeah, you're right. They were so good until an absolutely terrible decision by Akis. And I know you could argue there have been worse roughing the passers, but still, you got to know. You got to know. So 8 or more penalties in your first road game, loud environment, not going to do it. That's it.
Yeah. I won't go with penalties then. Illinois will lose if they're, I hate to put it on 2 guys. I hate to do that. But Illinois is going to lose if we have a similar performance from Randolph and Newton, because these are your 2 best players. They're the 2 best players on your team. That coming into the year, that's what we thought, and that's honestly what it should be. If they play a game like they played last week, then we're going to lose this football game, because then they're going to be able to run the football, and the run does set up the pass if you have a successful running game. And we know Kansas can pass the football. So you're not going to be in a situation like you were last week where they're running. What's going to stop them? Oh, they decide to pass for some reason. That's the other thing. I never understand when teams have something they're very good at and it's working, and then they just go away from it and decide to pass the football. Like, that Finn kid can run, but I mean, that's pretty much what he was best at doing. And anytime he tried to pass it, it was almost like you breathed a sigh of relief.
When Sims in Nebraska decided, when they're leading in Minnesota, we're just going to turn Sims into a passing quarterback. Sure. Whatever. By the way, I saw a power ranking of Big Ten quarterbacks after week 1 from Ant Wright, who is he's a Big Ten basketball guy more, but he follows football. He had Altmeyer number 4. And I looked at that list and I was like, yeah, that seems
in the
right.
Big Ten or West?
Big Ten.
Wow.
Behind Aller, Tua's little brother. Basically, it followed the PFF grades, I think. So it was Aller, Tua's younger brother, McCarthy. He had him above McCord. He had him above Cade McNamara, which I agree with. Certainly above, I think he might have had, he had him just below Hudson Card, which I think is arguable. I'll take the 3 years of Luke Altmeyer over one of Hudson Card. But my point is with this, I think he had Sims as 13. I mean, the guy can run, but he is just going to make dumb decision after dumb decision throwing it. And I'm looking at our schedule, Harry. I mean, I'm sorry, Mordecai from Wisconsin, that doesn't scare me. Iowa's offense was stagnant and boring yet again. It's just, I feel like this is actually a kind of nice start to the year, because the team can go through the fire of this opening stretch, and then on the other side, they get some Big Ten West offenses that you look at that don't have the dynamic quarterback. that are just sort of more your kind of bread and butter. Because last year that defense racked up those great stats against, let's be honest, not the most dynamic quarterbacks.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I've gone on the record as saying that I am a fan of starting with a more relatively tough schedule. Now I'm not going to go out there and say that Illinois is trying to schedule big bad opponents, because let's be honest, you scheduled Toledo and Kansas 5 years ago. Yeah, Toledo you would expect would be a middle of the pack MAC team. Kansas, you scheduled Kansas 5 years ago. You thought you were scheduling Rutgers 2.0. So, no credit there for the scheduling department. But I do think that this is the toughest opening 3-game stretch we've had probably since, I'm not sure an exact year, but back for maybe one of those years you had like Missouri to open up the year, maybe Arizona State a couple of weeks in, or when you played, I think Louisiana Tech was good one year, but you got blasted by them.
Yeah.
So that was fun. No, I think it helps because you're going into this with these 2 first games that they do matter. I'm not going to say they don't matter, because every game in college football matters. You don't want to lose to Toledo. You don't want to lose to a lower level, lower division team, lower conference team. But if you were to go 0-2 against Toledo and Kansas, I mean, we saw Northwestern a couple of years ago go 0-2, 0-3, and then win the Big Ten West. They don't necessarily impact the goal of what this Illinois team is, or at least should be, and that is making the Big Ten championship game. So you have 2 warm-ups against really, really good competition. I mean, good competition for you, because I think it's right in that sweet spot. You're not playing FCS teams, and it's not like we're playing Ohio State or Georgia. You're not going into these games where we're going to get our doors blown off. Although, I mean, I have to be tentative saying that, seeing as the last time we played a top-tier team, we almost beat them. Sure. You're going into these games against competition that's right there with you, and it's going to get you ready for the tougher teams that you play, while teams like Iowa and Wisconsin are playing lower level competition to get an easy win.
Let's make our predictions. I don't know if you were prepared to make one.
Oh, I'm ready.
I'm so
ready.
Harry, you start. You can throw a score out if you want to as well, and why.
Okay. This might be a little daring. This might be, but I can't shake that this is the feeling I have going into this game. I think that we're going to win this football game. I think we're going to win something to the effect of, like, I'm going to say 34-13.
What? Whoa.
Yeah, I think the defense shows up, and I think the offense shows up. I think that they're going to be pissed. And I think that in situations where, because I'm looking at this for Kansas, similar to I've looked at maybe games where we've gotten hyped as Illinois fans early on. The games that come to my mind are North Carolina. There was a couple of Nebraska games. I think there was a Nebraska game, Lovey, in 2017 that I think a lot of people were excited for. We lost 28-6. There was the North Carolina game. You score that first touchdown, you lose. I forget. I think you lose by like 3 or 4 touchdowns. It wasn't necessarily good. You know what? 13's not a lot. I'm going to say I do think you're going to win by multiple scores. I'll say like 34-17.
Wow.
Yeah. The feeling, I can't shake it. The feeling I have for this game is they're, again, Kansas really feeling those oats. They got them, they're cooking them up, and they're feeling those oats. Whereas we're coming into this game and we're pissed. That game against Toledo should not have been as close as it was. I don't care. And this is what they're thinking. I don't care if they were, getting more votes than us. They're a MAC school. We were in a New Year's Day bowl game last year against SEC level competition, a game we very well could have won, and we eked that one out. We're going on the road. We're gonna, this is a tune-up for the Big Ten conference schedule starting with us next week against Penn State. We got to go show the world what we're doing. Also, it's on ESPN too. So, people are going to be watching. It's not going to be like Toledo. This is your first chance to really make an impact. Maybe that lights a fire under some of these guys who have an NFL future. I don't know. But I do think that this is going to be a game that Illinois wins, and I do feel like they're going to win by a little bit.
Wow. If that happens, dude, quick question before I make my prediction. The one less day preparation. Is that a problem?
I don't think so because we both have one less day. It's
But
not.
they
It's
had
not.
one more because they had a Friday game.
Yes.
So I should say, does Kansas have an advantage, or how much of an advantage with that extra day?
I never really bought into that. You had too much more of an advantage with one day, because that one day, all that they're really going to be doing anyway is they're taking Saturday off. They get one more day of rest, and if that's the case, then all Illinois really has to do is maybe take one of those days of rest and turn it into a run through or a walkthrough they have. So, I mean, you see it all the time, in the NFL with some of those Thursday night games. Those are a little bit weird, but I mean, I never really bought into the one extra day off giving you that much of an advantage.
And that's Sunday to Thursday. So that's 2 days less, right? Yeah, I think Harry, also being early enough in the season, we aren't talking about fatigue or any of that yet. So, all right. Well, I can't top your prediction, but I cannot help but shake the notion, kind of like you mentioned, this team in the Bielema era has always played best when you least expect them to go out and play a really good game. I'll give you the most recent example would be Michigan. You had lost 2 home games. You give up a quick touchdown to Michigan. Then you settle in, and then you damn near win it. You should have won it, but that's whatever. And then you go back to the first year and games after Wisconsin smoked you. Homecoming. You got a bye week, of course, as well. There were the comments about the offensive line. You beat Penn State. You come home, you're feeling a little too good about yourselves, lose to Rutgers. Oh, well, now we're pissed again. You beat Minnesota. It was Iowa. Oh, then you smoke Northwestern. I don't think it's going to be so back and forth this year because I do think the competition levels out and where you can go on a few winning streaks. But I do think mentally, if I am to trust this coaching staff as much as I still do, despite some frustration Saturday, I think that mentally they will be in the right place. And if they are mentally in the right place, I think all things being equal, that defense will have a much better performance and the offense will continue to cook. So I will go Illinois 38 and I'll go Kansas 27. You will keep them under 30. Listen, here's another thing, Harry. You had 4 red zone trips against Toledo, touchdown, 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 game-winning field goal. This offense with a guy like Luke Altmeyer that can run the ball when he needs to. And hey, even a Josh McCray who did get a touchdown running it up the gut, I believe, right? He had 1 rushing touchdown.
It was the first drive. It was the first drive.
He had to get a quick yard.
He got stuffed the first time, and then the second time he was able to get through.
You have more options. I think that will cure the red zone issues, and you'll need to score touchdowns, but I think he will against Kansas. I can't shake the feeling, Harry. I mean, if you asked me Saturday night, I would have said, yeah. Like my gut reaction after the game would have been, this is bad news against Kansas. It's like, well, wait a second. This is football, man. Football is weird. And just because you played a D game or a C- against Toledo doesn't mean you're going to play a C- game against Kansas. In fact, often it means the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually like we've said, when you play, your bad games, that's usually where you come up. Also, they know they have to play better than they did because of the level of competition. They know that they have to, dial it in more. They got to lock in more. And yeah, I think, we've seen enough times where that is the case. It was last year you came out, Virginia was your first game after you played Indiana. Mm-hmm. Virginia, I know that they're, not a great team, but I think any team really is, better than Indiana. And you're able to go out there and beat them you shut them out, right? 31-0.
Oh, or was they might have gotten a field goal late, but now one primary difference. Virginia was replacing an entire offensive line. I don't think you'll be able to do that to a Kansas offense that has everybody back. But you could do something in the middle. And yeah, I don't know, Harry. I mean, I should feel more concerned. I do think, and I will say this to caution myself, that if they come out flat again, specifically the line, specifically the defensive line, if I see that kind of performance again, I start thinking, what's going on? Because I know that's only 2 games, but these are games where you should be able to see some production from those guys. I'd like to think that I don't have to wake up Saturday morning thinking, wait a second, are our two best players not really our two best players?
Yeah, and I mean, I think I don't think that's going to be the case because I don't. I mean, what else could it if they were to come out here and they just precipitously drop off from last year? It's not like it's the defensive coordinator that was able to put them in every exact situation they need to be in to be as hyped as they were coming into the season. Nothing against Ryan Walters, but also he just gave up 40 points to Fresno State. I know Fresno State's good, but you didn't give up 40 points to anyone last year. So I would imagine it's got to. I mean, they're going to be more hyped up. Maybe it's the first game of the year, and you're thinking, okay, we can go out there, we can just kind of walk through the motions, and we can, get the easy W. Clearly wasn't the case. Now they're going to see, okay, we got to play, much better football against a team that's in the Big 12 and was in a bowl game last year. I think you could definitely have a situation. Now, you won't feel as good because that would just be stupid. This would be stupid if I were to say, you could lose this game and feel better than you were last week. No, that's not how it works. If you lose this game, it doesn't matter how you look. You won't feel better than you did last week. But you could lose this game and play better than you did against Toledo. Yeah. I 100% think that. Again, it sounds weird to say, seeing as I do think we're going to win this game. But I think that if you come out here and you play a better game than you did against Toledo, which isn't hard because the defense did not look great for a lot of it, and Kansas just comes out and slings the ball all over the field, then you get beat by a team that play better than you.
Yeah, and you can live with that a little bit more. But man, if you win, those are two big pillars to have the non-conference schedule right there.
I'll tell you what, man, for two strong, just beams of light for you going into that Penn State game, the all important. My goodness, could you imagine if you're 2-0 going into that one? There are going to be some fireworks at that game. My goodness.
The energy was great on Saturday in the lots. It was different. It was a sort of, we might have a good football team. And if you can come back 2-0, I can only imagine. And we're already making completely vulgar jokes about what we will do. Me, Trevor, and Isaac, that is, about what we will do if they start 3-0. And I have a few things in mind. But first things first, beat Kansas. You and I feel good about it. I hope that when we talk next Tuesday, we can recap what would be, let's be honest, a huge win. It would be huge. And that makes the Penn State game gravy. It really does.
Yeah. If you're 2-0 going into Kansas or beating Kansas, you were just flying straight into that Penn State game full of confidence.
Harry, is always a great time. So we'll see you next Tuesday. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Yes, I will be here.
Awesome.
Right in the room with all the Squishmallows.
Oh, yes. I love Squishmallows. They're very comfy. All right, man.
Yes.
Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next week. All right, Harry?
All
right. See you, bud. All right. That is the one and only Harry Black joining us here on the 200 level. So as we wrap up, a quick reminder, we got merch. We have a hooded sweatshirt. Pre-order up through September 16th, and the form link is available on our Twitter page at the 200 level. And I also put it out on mine at Fanboy Carp, and it's got all the information there, free delivery if you're in town or you want to pick it up from lot 31, and we can ship them too. So I hope if you're interested in some fall swag, it's almost hoodie season, as the kids say. What, the SCN? I'm way too old for that crap. But you know what? It is almost time to be rocking that hoodie in the tailgate lots. And I think this one, hey, it's the orange and blue that you would wear for Illini apparel anyway. All right, before we get out of here, quick reminder, the 200 level is brought to you by DPDO. Online at dpdo.com. For all the best deals and prices, dpdo.com. Also, State Farm agent Brian Hansen, online at brianismyguy.com. Life, auto, home, business renters, you name it, brianismyguy.com. Also, Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. Give them a call today at 217-841-4728 to get your furnace check scheduled. That's Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. And finally, Owen Builders LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. They got a gallery of all their work online at, again, owenbuildersllc.com. Finally, Campus Town Street Fest is Saturday, September 9th. So this Saturday from 1 to 7 on what looks to be a beautiful September day with live music, vendors, food, the Chow Down in Campus Town, they're calling it. That's Saturday from 1 to 7, brought to you by Champaign Center Partnership. JSM Living, and the City of Champaign. Champagne Showers Podcast Network, appreciate them and appreciate you for listening. Ratings and reviews always help out on Apple Podcasts. Got a few in the last week. The more the merrier, even just a review. And if you really don't like us and you hate listening, we'll take a 1-star review too. That's fine. All right, everybody, we're back Friday. It's going to be me and Isaac. Trevor has a trip that he's got this weekend. Isaac and I will be here for the entire second half. It's going to be a long one. Hopefully it's going to be an exciting one that we can end that podcast talking about a 2-0 football team. I understand why people would be reluctant for it, and there's a reason the line in Vegas is what it is. But keep this in mind. I think the old rule of thumb is that usually home teams are good for 3 points in football. And the spread right now sits at 3.5. This is kind of a wash in terms of a matchup, which tells me it really just comes down to which team, well, this is analysis right here, plays better. I'd like to think that we take a step up from what we did against Toledo, and I just have this gut feeling they will. But hey, I had a gut feeling we'd beat Toledo by 2 scores. In fairness, if they would have just played clean, they might have. But maybe it's beneficial that they didn't play their cleanest game, and they'll be laser focused on what is a huge, huge game at Kansas. So hopefully we have some fun. I know we'll have fun regardless, but man, if they win, what a Friday night that would be. So we'll see you Friday night for a live YouTube stream with me and Isaac. In the meantime, everybody have a great rest of your short work week, and we'll see you Friday night at, let's say, about 8 o'clock. Take care, everybody. It is the 200 level.